What happened next will leave you speechless. Sarah walked into that five-star hotel wearing a $20 thrift store dress, and within minutes, the entire staff had decided she didn't belong there. They made her scrub floors, carry luggage, and serve drinks to actual guests. Little did they know that her husband owned the entire hotel chain, and she was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come disguised as ordinary moments. For Sarah Chen, that moment arrived on a Tuesday morning when she decided to surprise her husband at his hotel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She had no idea that her simple act of love would expose the ugly truth about how people treat others based on nothing more than appearance. Sarah had been married to David for 3 years, but their relationship was built on something most couples never experience. They had met when she was a struggling college student working double shifts at a diner, and he was just another customer who always ordered coffee and pie. What she didn't know then was that David owned half the city's real estate, including the diner where she worked. He had fallen in love with her genuine kindness, the way she remembered every customer's name, how she always asked about their families. Even after they married, Sarah insisted on maintaining her independence. She continued her job as a social worker, driving her modest Honda Civic to visit families in need. David respected her wishes to keep their wealth private. She wore simple clothes, shopped at regular stores, and lived quietly in their penthouse that most people assumed belonged to David alone. The Grandview Palace Hotel was David's pride and joy. The 40-story glass tower dominated the city skyline, and its reputation for luxury attracted celebrities, politicians, and business moguls from around the world. Sarah had only visited twice, both times for charity events where she stayed quietly by David's side. That Tuesday morning, David had mentioned he was stressed about the hotel's annual inspection. The corporate board was visiting, and everything had to be perfect. Sarah decided to surprise him with his favorite homemade cookies and maybe steal a few minutes together during his busy day. She chose a simple gray dress from Target, comfortable flats, and tied her long black hair in a practical ponytail. Looking in the mirror, she felt good about her choice. The dress was clean, modest, and appropriate. She grabbed the container of cookies and her worn leather purse, then headed downtown. The Grandview Palace rose before her like a monument to wealth and power. Uniformed doormen stood at attention, their gold-trimmed jackets spotless. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway while valets in crisp white shirts moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the gleaming glass entrance. The lobby was a masterpiece of marble and crystal. A fountain dominated the center, surrounded by leather seating areas where guests in expensive suits conducted quiet business meetings. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, and the ceiling stretched up 3 stories with a chandelier that probably cost more than most people's houses. Sarah approached the reception desk where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a navy blazer was typing on a computer. Her name tag read Jessica. Sarah waited patiently as Jessica finished whatever she was doing, then looked up with a professional smile that immediately faltered when she saw Sarah's simple appearance. "Can I help you?" Jessica asked, her tone suggesting that help was the last thing she intended to offer. "Hi, I'm here to see David Chen. I'm his wife Sarah." Jessica's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. She looked Sarah up and down slowly, taking in the bargain dress, the practical shoes, the simple purse. "His wife? Yes, I thought I'd surprise him with some homemade cookies. Is he in his office?" "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Sarah pulled out her driver's license, which still showed her maiden name since she'd never gotten around to changing it. Jessica studied it with obvious skepticism. "This says Sarah Martin. I kept my maiden name professionally. But I'm married to David Chen." Jessica picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Security, we have a situation at the front desk. Someone claiming to be Mr. Chen's wife." She paused, listening. "No, definitely not. Well, you'll see." Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared. The older one, whose badge identified him as Frank, looked at Sarah with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen this before. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Mr. Chen is in important meetings today, and we can't have people claiming to be family members without proper verification. But I am his wife. Call his assistant Jennifer. She knows me." Frank shook his head. "Jennifer's out sick today." "Look, lady, I'm sure you're a nice person, but we get people in here all the time trying to scam their way up to the executive floors. The easiest way is claiming to be related to the boss. Sarah felt her cheeks burning. I'm not scamming anyone. I'm Sarah Chen, and I just wanted to bring my husband some cookies. The younger security guard Marcus smirked. Lady, does Mr. Chen look like the kind of guy who'd marry someone who shops at thrift stores? The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah had never been judged so harshly for something so superficial. My clothes don't define who I am. Around here they do, Marcus replied. This is a 5-star establishment. We have standards. Frank looked slightly uncomfortable with his partner's rudeness, but didn't contradict him. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or we'll have to escort you out. Sarah was about to argue when another voice interrupted. What seems to be the problem here? They turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching. She wore an expensive black suit, and carried herself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her makeup was flawless despite the early hour. Mrs. Morrison, Jessica said quickly. This person is claiming to be Mr. Chen's wife. Patricia Morrison was the hotel's general manager, a woman who had built her career on knowing exactly who belonged in her establishment and who didn't. She looked at Sarah with the same dismissive expression as the others. I see, and you are. Sarah Chen. I'm David's wife, and I just wanted to surprise him at work. Patricia's laugh was sharp and cold. My dear, I've worked with David Chen for 15 years. I know his family, his friends, his social circle. I can assure you that his wife doesn't shop at discount stores. How can you possibly know where I shop? Honey, when you've been in hospitality as long as I have, you learn to read people instantly. Your dress is polyester blend. Probably cost less than what we charge for afternoon tea. Your shoes are from a department store clearance rack, and that purse has seen better days. Sarah felt smaller and smaller as Patricia continued her assessment. More importantly, David Chen's wife would never show up here unannounced, looking like... Patricia gestured vaguely at Sarah's outfit. Like this. I don't understand why my appearance matters. I'm a person, not a fashion statement. In this business, appearances are everything. They tell us about breeding, education, social status. They tell us who belongs and who doesn't. Frank shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Morrison, maybe we should just call Mr. Chen's office to verify. Absolutely not, Patricia cut him off. David is meeting with the board of directors today. The last thing he needs is to be interrupted by some delusional woman who thinks she can lie her way into his life. Sarah's hands were shaking now, but not from nervousness. Anger was building in her chest like a fire. I'm not lying about anything. Of course you're not, dear, Patricia said with fake sympathy. I'm sure in your mind you really believe you're married to one of the wealthiest men in the city. But reality is quite different, isn't it? The lobby had grown quiet. Other guests were pretending to read newspapers or check their phones, but Sarah could feel their eyes on her. Staff members were whispering among themselves, probably spreading word about the crazy woman who thought she was Mrs. Ch. Tell you what, Patricia continued, her voice taking on a more businesslike tone. We're actually short-staffed in housekeeping today. If you really need work, I can offer you a temporary position. Minimum wage, of course, but it's honest work. Sarah stared at her. You want me to clean rooms? It would be more appropriate than pretending to be someone you're not. What do you say? Ready to do some real work instead of living in fantasy? The humiliation was complete. Not only had they refused to believe she was David's wife, but now they were offering her a job as a maid in her husband's own hotel. I don't need a job, I need you to call my husband. Your husband? Patricia repeated mockingly. Right. Well, your imaginary husband is busy running a real business. Meanwhile, you can either accept my generous job offer or leave the premises. Sarah looked around the lobby at all the faces staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. She thought about walking away, about maintaining her dignity and trying to reach David another way. But something deeper was happening here, something that went beyond her personal humiliation. These people were treating her like she was worthless, because of her clothes. How many other people did they dismiss every day based on appearance alone? How many genuinely important guests or business partners had they insulted without even realizing it? Fine, Sarah said quietly. I'll take the job. Patricia looked surprised. She had clearly expected Sarah to storm out in embarrassment. "Excellent. Marcus, take her down to housekeeping. Get her a uniform and put her to work on the 10th floor. And make sure she understands that hotel property stays on hotel premises." As Sarah followed Marcus toward the service elevators, she could hear the whispered conversations starting up behind her. She caught fragments. "Completely delusional. Probably homeless. Did you see those shoes?" The service elevator was a stark contrast to the gold-plated guest elevators. The walls were plain metal, and it smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. Marcus pressed the button for the basement level. "Look, lady," he said as they descended, "I don't know what game you're playing, but Miss Morrison doesn't like to be made a fool of. Do the work, keep your head down, and maybe you'll make it through the day without getting arrested for trespassing." The basement housekeeping area was a maze of supply closets, laundry rooms and break-in. The contrast with the opulent lobby was jarring. Here, everything was purely functional: concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of industrial washing machines. Maria Santos, the head of housekeeping, was a small woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She looked up from her clipboard as Marcus brought Sarah over. "This is the new girl Patricia sent down. Says her name is Sid." Maria studied Sarah's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people out of necessity. "You don't look like someone who needs this kind of work." "I don't," Sarah said quietly. "But apparently I'm doing it anyway." Marcus handed Sarah a gray uniform dress, and pointed toward a small changing room. "Get changed and report back here. Maria will show you what to do." As Sarah changed into the uniform, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror. The gray dress was shapeless and unflattering, designed for function rather than appearance. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a hotel maid. When she emerged, Maria was waiting with a supply cart loaded with towels, sheets and cleaning products. "I've been doing this for 25 years, Maria said as they walked toward the service elevator. "I've seen all kinds of people come and go, but I've never seen anyone look as out of place as you do right now." "What do you mean?" "Your hands. They're soft. You've never done manual labor. Your posture, the way you speak, even the way you carry yourself. You're educated, probably college degree or higher. So what's a woman like you doing here pretending to be a maid?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes life puts you in situations you never expected." "That's true enough," Maria said. "But usually those situations make sense when you look close enough. This doesn't make sense at all." They rode the elevator to the 10th floor, where Maria began explaining the procedures for cleaning guest rooms. Sarah listened carefully, trying to absorb the information while her mind raced with thoughts about what David would say when he found out what had happened. The first room was a standard suite that had been vacated that morning. Maria demonstrated the proper way to strip beds, clean bathrooms, and replace amenities. The work was physically demanding and detail-oriented. "The guests on this floor are VIPs, Maria explained. Business executives, celebrities, people who expect perfection. One hair in the bathroom sink, one wrinkle in the bedspread, and they'll complain to management." As Sarah began working on her own, she found herself thinking about the irony of the situation. She was cleaning rooms in a hotel that her husband owned, being supervised by people who were technically her employees. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so humiliating. 2 hours into her shift, Sarah was vacuuming the carpet in a junior suite when she heard voices in the hallway. Through the open door she could see Patricia Morrison walking with a group of well-dressed men in expensive suits. Sarah recognized them immediately. "The hotel's board of directors. Revenue is up 12% this quarter," Patricia was saying. "Our guest satisfaction scores are the highest in the city." One of the board members, an elderly man with silver hair, nodded approvingly. "David will be pleased." "Where is he, by the way?" "In the penthouse conference room, preparing for the presentation. He should be down shortly." Sarah's heart began to race. David was here, somewhere in the building, probably wondering where she was. She had told him she might stop by, but when she didn't show up at his office, he would assume she had changed her mind. She turned off the vacuum and moved closer to the door, hoping to catch Patricia's attention. But as the group approached, Patricia's expression changed from professional pleasantness to annoyance. "You," she said sharply to Sarah. "What are you doing standing around? These carpets won't clean themselves." The board members glanced at Sarah with the casual indifference
People showed toward service workers. She was invisible to them. Just another uniformed employee doing her job. "Sorry, ma'am," Sarah said quietly. "The help these days," Patricia muttered to the board members as they continued down the hall. "No work ethic whatsoever." Sarah stood there holding the vacuum handle, watching them disappear around the corner. She had never felt so powerless in her life. She was literally feet away from people who knew her husband, who could verify her identity with a single phone call. But they saw her as nothing more than a maid who wasn't working hard enough. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of cleaning supplies and dirty.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah's back ached from bending over beds and bathtubs. Her hands were raw from harsh chemicals. The simple dignity of her morning routine felt like it had happened to someone else entirely. During her lunch break, she sat in the basement break room with Maria and several other housekeeping staff. They were kind people who worked hard for modest wages, and they had accepted her without question. The irony wasn't lost on her that the people at the bottom of the hotel's hierarchy were treating her with more respect than those at the top. "You're different from most people who end up here," said Carmen, a woman about Sarah's age who had been working at the hotel for 8 years. "Most of the temps we get are either desperate for any work or running from something. You don't seem like either." "Maybe I'm running from something," Sarah said. "Maybe I just didn't know it until today. What could someone like you be running from?" Sarah looked around the break room at these women who worked so hard for so little, who were treated as invisible by the very people whose lives they made comfortable. "Maybe I'm running from the truth about who I really am." The afternoon brought more of the same: endless rooms to clean, more dismissive comments from supervisors, more moments of feeling like she had ceased to exist as an individual. But something was changing inside Sarah. The humiliation was giving way to something else, something harder and more focused. She began to pay closer attention to how the staff treated each other versus how management treated the staff. She noticed the subtle ways that class distinctions were maintained, how quickly people were dismissed based on their uniforms or their accents or their job titles. By 4 o'clock, Sarah had cleaned 12 rooms and was exhausted in ways she had never experienced. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and her hands were cracked from the cleaning chemicals. But her mind was crystal clear. She was standing in the hallway folding towels when she heard a familiar voice echoing from the main elevator bank. Her heart's meeting ran longer than expected. "But I think we covered everything important." David's voice, warm and confident, the same voice that told her he loved her every morning and every night. Sarah dropped the towels and moved toward the sound. He was walking with 2 of the board members, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his presence commanding even in casual conversation. Sarah had always been proud of how her husband carried himself, but seeing him now from this perspective, she understood for the first time how intimidating he must appear to people who didn't know him. "David," she called softly. He didn't hear her over the conversation. The group continued toward the main lobby, and Sarah followed at a distance, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment when everything would change, when the truth would finally come out. Sarah smoothed her gray uniform dress and took a deep breath. She had no idea that the next 10 minutes would transform not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who had dismissed her that day. Sarah followed David and the board members toward the lobby, her gray uniform rustling with each hurried step. The contrast between her appearance and theirs was stark. They moved with the confidence of people accustomed to power, while she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be: hired help trying to get their attention. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, louder this. David turned, and for a split second his face showed polite confusion. Then recognition dawned, and his expression shifted through surprise, concern, and finally a dangerous kind of anger, as it took in her uniform and obvious exhaustion. "Sarah?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here? And why are you dressed like that?" Before she could answer, Patricia Morrison appeared as if materialized from thin air. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. This employee is bothering you. She's been causing problems all day, claiming to be your wife." The board members looked on with interest, probably assuming they were witnessing the removal of a delusional worker. David's jaw tightened as he processed Patricia's words. "Claiming to be my wife." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Yes, she showed up this morning with some ridiculous story about being married to you. We offered her honest work instead of letting her continue with the fantasy,
but she's clearly unstable. David looked at Patricia with the kind of expression that had made him successful in business. The look of a man who had just identified a serious problem that needed immediate correction. Patricia, this is my wife. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Patricia's confident expression crumbled into confusion, then horror as the implications hit her. Your wife, my wife of 3 years, Sarah Chen, the woman you apparently decided to humiliate and force into manual labor, because you didn't approve of her clothing. One of the board members, an elderly man named Robert Thornton, stepped forward. David, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right, David said, his eyes never leaving Patricia's face. My wife came here to surprise me with homemade cookies, and instead of being treated as a guest, she was accused of being a fraud and given a job cleaning toilets. Patricia's face had gone completely white. Mr. Chen, I had no idea. She didn't look like, her dress was so what, Patricia? I assumed someone of your stature would have a wife who dressed more appropriately for a 5-star establishment. The silence that followed was deafening. David's expression had gone from angry to something much more dangerous. The cold calculation of a man who had built an empire and wasn't afraid to tear down anyone who threatened what he loved. Robert, David said to the board member, I'd like you to meet my wife properly. Sarah, this is Robert Thornton, our lead investor. Sarah has a master's degree in social work and dedicates her life to helping underprivileged families. She's also the kindest, most genuine person I've ever met. Sarah stepped forward, still in her gray uniform, and extended her hand. Nice to meet you, Mr. Thornton. Robert shook her hand, his businessman's instincts telling him to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Chen. I apologize for any confusion. David's attention returned to Patricia, who looked like she might faint. Patricia, in your 15 years here, have you learned anything about my management philosophy? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You believe in treating everyone with respect and dignity. Exactly, and what you've done today is the exact opposite of everything this company stands for. You judged my wife based on her appearance, humiliated her publicly, and then forced her to work as punishment for having the audacity to claim she belonged here. Sir, I can explain. Explain what? That you think someone's worth is determined by their clothing. That you believe expensive dress equals moral care. That you assumed I would marry someone based on their ability to spend money on designer labels. Patricia was crying now, her perfect makeup streaking down her cheeks. Please, Mr. Chen, I've worked here for 15 years. This job is my life, and my wife's dignity is mine, David replied coldly. Security, Frank and Marcus appeared within seconds, both looking considerably less confident than they had that morning. Gentlemen, I understand you were involved in this morning's incident with my wife. Frank shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we were just following protocol. Protocol that involves assuming someone is lying about their identity. Protocol that includes mocking their appearance and refusing to make a simple phone call for verification. Marcus, the younger guard who had been particularly cruel, tried to speak up. Mr. Chen, we get a lot of people trying to scam their way. My wife doesn't look like a scammer, Marcus. She looks like a woman who chooses substance over style, character over cost. But apparently that's not something your training covered. David pulled out his phone and made a call. Legal department, I need someone up here immediately. We have some terminations to process. Mr. Chen, please, Patricia begged. I have a mortgage, car payments. I'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you decided to lose your humanity, David replied. Sarah, how many hours did you work today? About 6 hours. 6 hours of manual labor because these people couldn't see past their own prejudices. He turned back to Patricia. You know what the saddest part is? You had the chance to meet an incredible woman today. Instead, you saw a cheap dress and decided she was worthless. A woman from the legal department arrived, tablet in hand, looking confused about why she'd been summoned to what appeared to be a confrontation in the lobby. Jennifer, I need immediate termination paperwork for Patricia Morrison, Frank Williams and Marcus Rodriguez, cause discrimination and violation of company values. Sir, Jennifer said carefully, Patricia is the general manager. Don't you want a review? I've reviewed enough. These people humiliated my wife based on her opinion. They forced her to work as a maid because they decided she wasn't good enough to be here as a guest. If that's not a violation of everything we stand for, I don't know what is. The lobby had grown quiet again, But this time the whispers were different. Staff members were realizing that the woman they'd seen cleaning rooms was actually the owner's wife. Guests were pulling out phones, sensing a story worth recording. Jessica, the receptionist who had first dismissed Sarah, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Chen, I'm so sorry. I should have called your office when she first arrived." "Yes, Jessica, you should have. But more than that, you should have treated her with basic human courtesy regardless of who she was." Will I be fired too?" David looked at Sarah, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold. "What do you think, sweetheart?" "Jessica, you decided you were lying about being my wife. Should she keep her job?" Sarah studied the young woman's terrified face. "Jessica, why didn't you believe me? Your dress was from Target, your purse was— You just didn't look like someone who would be married to Mr. Chen. And what should the wife of a successful businessman look like?" Jessica struggled for words. "Someone more polished, sophisticated, expensive." "So you think David chose me for my shopping ability rather than my character?" "No, ma'am. I'm sorry, I was wrong." Sarah looked at David. "I think Jessica learned something today. Maybe we all did." David nodded slowly. "Jessica, you keep your but you're going to attend sensitivity training, and you're going to think very carefully about how you judge people in the future." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Thank you so much." Patricia made one last desperate attempt. "Mrs. Chen, please, you seem like a compassionate person. Surely you can understand that I was just trying to protect the hotel's reputation." Sarah turned to face the woman who had spent the day treating her like dirt. "Patricia, you weren't protecting anything. You were perpetuating the idea that a person's worth is determined by their wealth. You taught your staff that appearances matter more than humanity. You created an environment where kindness is conditional on clothing. I can change, I can learn. I'm sure you can, but you'll have to do it somewhere else." David's lawyer arrived with the termination paperwork. As Patricia, Frank and Marcus were escorted from the building, other staff members began approaching Sarah with apologies and explanations. Maria, the head of housekeeping, came forward with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry. I knew something wasn't right, but I should have spoken up." "Maria, you were the only person who treated me with kindness today. You saw that I didn't belong in that uniform, but you never made me feel less than human because of it." "What will happen to housekeeping now?" "We're already short-staffed," David answered. "Maria, you're the new assistant manager of housekeeping. Double your salary starts immediately, and Sarah will be working with HR to implement new training programs about dignity and respect for all employees." The crowd in the lobby was dispersing, but phones were still recording. By evening the story would be all over social media. Billionaire's wife treated like servant, mass firings at luxury hotel. As they rode the elevator to David's penthouse office, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. "I'm sorry," David said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to experience that." "I'm not sorry it happened," Sarah replied. "I learned something important today about how people are treated when they don't have power or status to protect them. What do you want to do about it?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about Maria and Carmen and the other housekeeping staff who had shown her more respect than the executives. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I want to create programs that teach people to see past appearance, and I want to use this experience to help others who face discrimination." David smiled for the first time that day. "That's exactly what I expected you to say. That's why I fell in love with you." The next morning the story was front-page news. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral, sparking conversations about class discrimination and the treatment of service workers. 3 days later, Sarah announced the creation of the Dignity Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to combating appearance-based discrimination in the workplace. Patricia Morrison's LinkedIn profile now showed her as seeking new opportunities. Frank found work as a security guard at a shopping mall. Marcus was working at a fast food restaurant, where he was learning firsthand how it felt to be judged by his uniform. Jessica enrolled in community college courses on social justice, and became one of the hotel's most empathetic employees. Maria was promoted again within 6 months, and started a program pairing experienced staff with newcomers to prevent discrimination. The Grandview Palace Hotel became known not just for luxury, but for its revolutionary approach to staff training and guest relations. Other hotels began adopting their programs, and Sarah found herself speaking at conferences about the power of treating every person with dignity. But the most important change was personal. Sarah learned that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the darkest moments, and that real strength isn't about what you wear or what you own. It's about how you treat others when you have every reason to treat them poorly. The simple woman in the thrift store dress had taught an entire industry that true class has nothing to do with money, and everything to do with character. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.